Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. Back in the booth, baby, not broadcasting you from the bunker. And it feels good. The sun is out, birds are chirping. Well, I'm sure they're chirping somewhere. And it's a good day to be kicking it with all my favorite people. Which is kind of funny because the topic today is fear. But before we get to that, a quick shout out to our sponsors. Our dutiful sponsor, at Affinity WES, that's at Affinity Writing and Editing Services. If you do anything with writing and editing, these are the people to turn to. They're available on Facebook or on Twitter, at Affinity WES. Let them know Silverlight sent you, and they'll do their best to make your job perfect. Hippie Witch Vibes. That's all one word. Hippie Witch Vibes. Capitalize HIPPIE, capital WITCH, capital VIBES. They're on Etsy. Search them out. They have a wonderful Stardust tea that goes perfectly when you're listening to the Silverlight Show. But that's not all. Their product line continues to expand. They have beads, bracelets, crystals, and I have no issues with crystals healing. As a matter of fact, I've benefited from it myself. So if you need a little something different, a little something special, go to Hippie Witch Vibes. They're sure to make whatever you need appear. Quick reminder, we do have a Twitter account for this show. It's at Silverlight Live. That's all lowercase, at Silverlight Live. We do love to hear from the audience, suggestions, ideas, whatever it might be. So feel free to hook up on Twitter at Silverlight Live, or if you want, drop us an email at silverlightservices@gmail.com. No matter what, we're ready to listen to you. And don't be afraid. We respond to every message we receive. Speaking of fear, that's kind of the point of this show. Which is funny because I'm speaking in the least fearsome location possible. My personal residence, with the windows open, my cat sitting on the desk in front of me, and it's pretty darn secure. But to be honest, last night, I had a quite long show recorded. I was proud of it. I'm not going to tell you what the subject was, but it was pretty in-depth. And just as I had finished recording, the computer crashed. That's right, it went down. And I was so upset, I just shut the computer off, disconnected everything, and came upstairs thinking, what am I going to talk about? What am I going to do? I just literally wasted an hour just in talking. And I have nothing to show for it. Then I got to thinking, what am I really upset about? Yes, losing an hour of my time was annoying. I won't deny that. But at the same token, it's nothing to get mad about. Computer crashes happen. This is 2021. Not 1983 with me sitting in front of a Commodore 64 and the thing goes on the blink. We understand computers a lot more now. We understand these things do happen. Yet there I was, upset. Upset over something really minor, like an hour of me talking to myself. It's actually a pretty common occurrence. The reason was, I was afraid. I'll come right out. Once I sat down and thought about it, I was afraid. I was afraid I'd messed my system up. I was afraid maybe there was something wrong and I was never going to get the system working again. I was afraid I might not be able to do this show for whatever crazy mechanical reason. Now, this is completely unfounded. Just a couple days ago, I was testing another computer to see how well the sound worked on it. Not as well as this, because I have a dedicated microphone and everything. But it came out perfectly well. It was something I could work with. And I mean, I'm an information-based show. I don't do fancy graphics. I don't do wild antics in front of the camera. I simply tell you the way things are. But yet that fear was there. For some crazy reason, I was afraid. It manifested itself as anger. And this brings back the old Star Wars adage from Yoda. Fear leads to hate. Hate leads to anger. Anger leads to suffering. George Lucas may not be a poet, but he does offer quite a bit of wisdom. Pretty much any decent writer does. We all have a point in our head that we're trying to get across. But turning to the subject of fear, fear is something that, well, everybody's afraid of. And I mean everybody. Whether you're some poor lost soul struggling on the street, going day to day, trying to scavenge enough coins together to get a cup of coffee, or whether you're the richest person sitting in your ivory tower and deciding whether you're going to put a project forward that's risky, all of us have that core of fear in our very souls. And it's worth talking about because it explains a great many things. It was something I actually talked on about the show, talked about on the show that got deleted, that I may redo again one day, but my frustration level is still a little bit high with that. Fear. Personally, I find fear fascinating. Panic attacks, anxiety attacks, all that, it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's your body turning against you. But why would your body do such a thing to you as to make you suffer for, I don't like to call it irrational, but that's what it is. And that's because ration is straight logic. Being rational is straight logic. Logically, you have nothing to be afraid of. But nobody can control their emotions. Nobody. A lot of people don't like liver. And they hate it. And no matter what you do, they're going to have the same reaction. Ew, get that away from me. A lot of people don't like snakes. Now, snakes and spiders. Now, as Grade A Under A, the YouTuber, humorously pointed out, this is actually kind of a rational fear. Because we can't tell which spiders are cute and cuddly and which snakes are going to kill you instantly in one bite. For the record, almost all of them don't. It's just a question of whether their anti-venom is available or not. So there we go. Is it a rational fear or an irrational one? I've known many people in my life that are afraid of cats and dogs. Most people listening to this channel are thinking, cats and dogs? But my cat's a sweetheart. My dog wouldn't hurt a fly. And you're probably right. Same token, you can never trust an animal. Animals are not like humans. They can't tell you, I'm tired, I'm hurt, I'm in pain, whatever it is. And they react out of fear too. If I bring in a strange child or a strange person, my cats might decide they want nothing to do with them. Cats are smart. Dogs are smart. A lot smarter than we give them credit for. Most animals are. And because of that, we have to think, why is my cat, dog, bird, gecko, whatever kind of pet you have, suddenly treating this person differently than everybody else? It's worth paying attention to. Maybe the person's being a little bit too energetic and they're used to a calm situation. Maybe they're picking up on your fear. You see, your cats and dogs and whatever, your gecko, isn't really good at reading other people. The other person's a blank, but they are good at reading you. And your subconscious reactions are really fascinating. And it would take an army of psychologists years studying just one social interaction to really pull it apart. The human brain is still pretty much an incomplete enigma. And that's why scientists get the funding that we do, because we still don't know why one person likes chocolate on their donut, another person likes those little sprinkles. It's a matter of human preference. But both people who, no matter what donuts they like, no matter whether they have a cat or a dog, are secretly hiding their fear. A joke that's come up, especially since the 1980s, my earliest recollection of it is in Calvin and Hobbes in the mid-80s. And it basically, the house has been broken into. And the father says something to the effect of, I always thought grown-ups had all the answers. I would have been in such a hurry to reach adulthood if I knew everything had to be ad-libbed. In other words, made up on the spot. That's the truth. People pretend to have master plans. And indeed, people do have plans. But they're usually not as detailed as people think. Yes, in chess you can plan 5-6 moves ahead. As a business owner, you're expected to have a business plan that goes potentially 20 or 30 years in the future. But as the old military adage says, every plan falls apart on contact with the enemy. And that's true. I can have the most perfect business plan, and there have been perfect business plans. And they still fall apart because the technology is not mature enough, the idea is too ambitious, they couldn't get in enough funding, whatever it is, and that just causes fear. That's what makes people overthink. The most natural and logical decisions you have are the ones that flow from the heart. And that's because you're reacting from love. Love are the things you do just simply because you love something. Whether it be a person. My wife has nightmares. Whenever I notice she's having a nightmare, I just gently shake her shoulder. And she wakes up, gets out of the nightmare. And I do that because I love her. Don't get all sappy on me. I just hate nightmares. Other people, they love gardening. And they create beautiful gardens. I'm sure we've all seen a beautiful garden and said, oh wow, look at how the flowers are organized. And that person's out there every day with their shovel and spade, picking out weeds, clipping bushes, doing whatever it is. It's out of love. And those decisions are the ones that are really meaningful, passionate. People who look at those poor people who have no food and stuff and say, hey, I know I can get together some people, put together some food, and give out some lunch buckets. And they do. That's love. It's also a little bit of fear mixed in there, because they fear someday they'll be in the same situation, and tit for tat is always a good evolutionary strategy. For those of you who don't know what tit for tat was, it's the foundation of game theory. In the late 70s, early 80s, they had a computer programming challenge. And the idea was, it's called the prisoner's dilemma. If two sides agreed to cooperate, they would each get 2 points. If one side decided to cooperate and the other side decided not to cooperate, the side that was cheating essentially got 4 points and the other one got 0. And then I forget what the other one was. But basically the optimum strategy was always to cooperate, because you would have a consistent amount of points rather than winning, losing, all that sort of thing. And the most ingenious computer program, the one that won it all, was called Tit for Tat. It was such a simple program. People had put these elaborate programs together based on patterns and all this sort of stuff, but Tit for Tat just did one simple thing. It opened up by cooperating. And then after that, it remembered the opponent's last decision and copied it. Kind of like humans do. You meet a new neighbor, you meet a new person, your first instinct is to try to be friendly. At least in most societies. You shake your hand, you say your hellos, how are you, stuff like that. But then if you discover that your keys are missing, somebody took your cup of coffee, whatever it is, next time you're going to be looking out for that person. You remember that last move. So when I say tit for tat is a valid strategy, that's what I'm referring to. And it won the tournament. It got the most points. I forget whether it was at MIT, whatever. You can look up game theory. It's really fascinating. Now, I don't really follow game theory, but the same token, it's an interesting model of how to predict what the brain is doing. I'm a little more interested in what was developed by Freud and refined by Jung, and in my opinion, taken to its highest extent by Ernest Becker. It's called the Eros-Thanatos complex. Eros, representing love. In Greek mythology, Eros was not only Cupid, the cute little winged chubby kid that you see on Valentine's cards shooting arrows at people, but it was also a primordial force. It was one of the ones that created the world. Thanatos, not Thanos, Thanatos, was the embodiment of death. And what Ernest Becker came up with was really fascinating. For any being with sentience, and please note there's a difference between sentience and sapience. Sentience means a creature is aware of its surroundings. So right now, whatever pet you have, pick them up and it's going to perk up and say, oh, this is my friend that takes care of me, because it's aware of its surrounding. Sapience is the ability to solve problems. We're talking a more basic level. We don't need our fictitious creature to do anything but be aware of its surroundings. It's aware it exists, it's aware other things exist. That's all it needs to be aware of. Ernest Becker, in his book Denial of Death, postulated that the Eros-Thanatos complex actually defines our existence. First thing that happens when whatever mystical point our consciousness emerges into the world is we become aware of ourselves. Very logical. You first have to be aware of yourself because you can't be aware of other things. You first, whether it's a diagnostic which says, yep, I'm alive, or whether it's just popping into existence and saying, oh, that one little moment is your eros kicking in. Your love, because the first thing you say is, hey, this is all cool. I've never seen any of this. The problem is, the immediate next thing that kicks in is the Thanatos complex, the death complex. Now, it's rather subtle. It's not, oh, I'm going to die, but it's the simple deduction that if I exist, I didn't exist before, and at some point in the future, I won't exist again. Now, it's very difficult for people to imagine a world that exists without them. Some psychologists say it's impossible. I say it's possible, but at the same token, most people, when they imagine Star Trek, Star Wars, Doctor Who, whatever it is, they kind of imagine themselves along for the ride. Now, imagine a world completely without you in it. You don't exist, etc. It's very challenging because you kind of unconsciously read a lot of elements into whatever it is that you imagine. It's because you're afraid the world can actually exist without you. As my father famously has said on multiple occasions, your workplace will go on perfectly fine without you. And he was not a lazy man. This is a man who would work multiple overtime shifts, who would work multiple jobs, who would be out on the weekend freelancing. But when things got bad, he would always say, hey, they can live without you, you can live without them. My father's a wise man. You have a very interesting podcast, but he doesn't have time for such things. Even at his age, he is still going 100 miles an hour. But that's one of the most common fears that I hear. Not so much this year. That wasn't intended to rhyme, but I'll take credit for it. People are always afraid, oh, if I don't go into work, nothing will get done. Probably not today. Because your coworkers are willing to let whatever you're doing sit. Give it 2 or 3 days for whatever reason you're taking the time off. let's just say you hurt your ankle, which is a good reason to take time off. Nobody can deny that it's difficult to walk around or do anything on a broken ankle. And I mean, it's a good break. It's not one of these things where the doctor just slaps a bit of tape on it, you're good to go. First fear, I don't want to lose my job. I need to work. Second fear, oh my God, how long is it going to be where I can't walk? I need help going to the bathroom, etc. Third thought, oh my God, all that work is going to pile up and I'm going to have to deal with it all. Mostly not. Most people in this world work pretty menial jobs, and I don't mean that in any offense, and I apologize if I offend somebody. Menial does not mean brainless. As a matter of fact, the most menial jobs you can think of require the most tact. Your job, let's pretend you're a janitor for 1 second. They might skip a day or two of you not cleaning out the garbage and mopping the floors. But sooner or later, whatever company you're with, whatever you're doing, they're going to tap somebody on the shoulder and say, hey, the garbage needs to be emptied. You're a junior person. Or they're going to bring in a temp. Or they're going to do something because that garbage needs to go, whether you're capable of doing it or not. Now let's invert that for a minute. Let's pretend you're a CEO. You are top dog in the company. You are the one who has to sign off on everything. Well, they work out of fear because they need that rush in their system. They need to remind people, I am the top dog, because they don't want to lose that position. They don't want to lose that prestige. So they go in and out of fear, despite the fact they have an ankle and they're told to keep off it for a couple of days, they're at home on their laptop, on their cell phone, making deals, talking to people, doing what it is. Some do it out of love, but most do it out of fear. The funny thing is, CEOs have very little to fear. Once you reach a certain pinnacle of management, you almost always are guaranteed a job. Unless you do something so horrible, like stealing from the company, that cannot be forgiven. And even then, even after committing war crimes, you can still get hired on by companies. I mentioned this a couple weeks ago. It still happens. War crimes are a little bit funny these days because wars aren't officially declared. But war crimes still happen. And war criminals are still getting signed on and given impressive bonuses to sit in an office and give advice. Probably to say, hey, this country's a pushover. Let's go in and use their people because it's going to be easy. I didn't say it was good advice, but you get what you pay for. And a lot of companies are willing to pay to have a name on their sheet. That's why these athletes retire and they're able to get jobs at CNN, the Sports Network, wherever you get your sports news from. In my opinion, their personality is paper thin. Again, I don't really watch mass media, but after they tell a few stories about what they used to do, they're pretty much dull as dirt. Sports celebrities and actors, actresses, whatever you want to call them, are simply not celebrities. And I do not look forward to hearing from them because they're acting out of fear as well. Let's take a sports celebrity. They live with fear in everything that they do. When they get the ball, when they get the puck, whenever they get into the ring, whatever it is they do, they're afraid. Sure, they might be confident. They might be full of bravado, but at the same token, they're afraid. If I lose this match, I'm going to look silly. Using match as a generic term. Chess players play out of fear. They're afraid of losing. But athletes will tell you, if you tune that fear out and just start performing in the way that you know that you can do it, then you get to that next level. If you can bury that fear, you become something greater. Actors, again, Not role models, not newsworthy. I don't care who they vote for. I don't care what their opinions are. Get them off my TV screen unless they're performing, and then I want to see them. But actors and actresses, I don't understand why that's sexist, but at the same token, I'm going to include it because I'm sure somebody still identifies as an actress and I want to include them. And I do say that out of fear. I will be completely honest with everybody. I say that out of fear because for some reason the term actress has fallen out of favor. But yet, in a world where there's such a spectrum of sexual identification, it doesn't make sense to retire a term that somebody might identify with. It's throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and is very silly in my humble opinion. Irrelevant as that may be, actors and actresses will tell you they're full of fear. Presenters, when they go on the stage, just Google right now if you have the time, how to overcome stage fright. And there'll be millions of articles, if not more. Because one of the biggest things to get in front of people and start talking. I'm fortunate here that I don't have an audience, but I've been trained to go in front of an audience and start speaking. I've been trained quite well, and I've done it, whether reading from a script or ad lib. It's a skill that I put into use every single week. And I do it partly out of fear and partly out of love. I do love what I talk about. I was agonizing over a topic for this week, and then that was one of the reasons I was mad about losing the podcast. Because I put all that effort into this. I could have been doing other things. I could have been doing this. And again, it was frustration and fear with myself when I break it down. And most people react the way they do out of fear. One of my casual hobbies, and this is very illuminating, is to go on the r/subreddit and look at people in customer service jobs or even complaints with their neighbors, and you can see how much fear people have. They call these people entitled parents, Karen, I don't work here lady, stuff like that. There's some great things to read. But when you listen to it, it all comes down to that other person being afraid. There was an interesting one. It was a 9-hour train ride, overnight of course, and the couple had booked one cabin and a chair outside. And it turned out there was another couple that had booked basically the same thing. And they got friendly, and couple number one, let's call them that. And this is on r/ on YouTube. You can go check that out if you like. The one couple had brought extra because it's a train trip and you got kids. Of course you're going to bring extra because you don't know what you're going to run out of, whether it's diapers, snacks, the kid's favorite toy, the kid's favorite music, whatever it is, the kid is going to at some point turn around and say, I want blah. And this is a sensible reaction, but it's done out of fear, because the fear is if your child doesn't get blah, they might have a hissy fit because they're tired, they're cranky, they're anxious, they're afraid because they didn't get what they want. Now that's wisdom right there. r/ didn't say that. That's my interpretation. And it's so fundamental within us that we naturally react to it. Parents do it every single day. I'm taking my kid out. If they're young enough, I need to take an extra bottle, an extra pair of diapers, whatever it might be. If it's older, I better take their favorite little portable toy just in case I need to distract them. If they're older than that, maybe take some sort of gaming station. You throw an extra game in, or a book, if you're old enough like me. And that's what it is. It's parents' fear responding to children's fear. Because a child feels insecure because they're in a different spot than normal, and things aren't going their way, and the parents' fear is they need to calm their child down. Back to the train. This other couple hadn't packed extras of much. And being generous, family number one gave them some extra stuff. In the middle of the night, I'll call him father number two, decided that he couldn't sleep in the cheap seat they had bought because of his back. Now at this point, I got sympathy for the man. I've been on planes, trains, automobiles, etc. Those chairs have to be designed by sadists. They are not comfortable at all. And I've said this before, the person in front of you slides their tray back, the person behind you puts their knees in the back of your seat, and there's no room to even put your cup holder down. And I'm not a fat man. I'm not a 600-pound person telling you there's no space in these things. I'm a tall person, but I'm not fat. I could stand to lose a little weight, I'll be honest, but it's just a matter for me, it's too cramped. And it doesn't matter whether it's a bus, a train, a plane, whatever it might be. Even my car. I drive a Honda, a Civic, an old one. And it gets a little cramped for me at times. People laugh at me getting out of it because it kind of looks like origami unfolding in front of them. I'm not self-conscious about my car though. But on a plane, a train, and an automobile, I do get that fear. I kind of feel like I'm being crushed and there's literally nowhere for me to escape to. This is my seat. I paid for this. Where do I go from there? So initially, I have sympathy for father number two, who says he wants to have a bed. Okay. He proceeds to ask family number one. Now, father number one doesn't want anything to do with this because he's paid for his family to be able to seat and he's willing to sit it out. So father number two goes back to family number one and asks the mother if she would mind sitting in his seat while he sleeps with her children. Well, let's remove the creepiness factor from here and put the fear factor in. No matter how good of a person you are, if I've met you for under 2 hours, I'm not letting you sleep with my kid. And of course, they made a fuss. They had the poor train conductors had to go through all sorts of crazy things in order to calm them down, move them, and find a different spot for them. But all that was because of fear. Like I said, initially, Father 2 has some of my sympathy because he's afraid, he's uncomfortable. If he's not at 100%, he's cross-country with his kids, and he doesn't have spares of anything, so he knows he's on his own. Father number 1 reacted out of fear because who wouldn't be at least mildly concerned when a strange man says, hey, how about you bring your wife out here and I sleep with your kids? Even as the most jolliest person in the world, that's a suspicious thing to ask. I don't even know if there's a point where you would trust somebody asking that. And I say that, I've got a couple friends that are darn good people. I would trust them with my kids without a question because I know they wouldn't be sleeping with them in the same bed. And that's not even implying anything beyond falling asleep in the same bed. Because that's a whole other fear I don't want to deal with on this channel, although I probably will have to at some point. It's just something I don't want to deal with at the present time. Maybe 2022 or 2023. We'll see. But you see, the whole world reacts in fear. You're on a train, you're in a scary place. Trains are scary. All of us say, oh, I'm not afraid of the train, or the plane, or whatever. But we all are, at some level, afraid because it's not our comfortable bed at home. It's not our general routine. There's scary people ready to jump us and take us down if they think that we have a clock in our briefcase or something suspicious. The entire atmosphere revolves around fear. I've called it security theater in the past, and I still firmly stand by that, given the fact that they've caught no terrorists, and they still make your life very uncomfortable. My opinion doesn't matter, though. Even back in the 90s, when I was doing a lot of my pleasure traveling, and there was no TSA or screening. Sure, the person waved the wand at you, you stepped through the box, oops, forgot my keys, okay, here you go. It was still an uncomfortable experience. They're constantly telling you, make sure you have your tickets, make sure you're ready to board, make sure you're at your gate 30 minutes before whatever. All legitimate things, but you've got all that running in your mind, and you're afraid, I don't want to miss my flight because it's going to cost me more money, and it's going to, when I reach the other place, if I miss this, if I'm delayed, if anything happens, I'm going to miss this, and the fear compounds on itself. See, fear controls everything. Now I'm going to take you out of your regular existence of fear. Fear of work, fear of flying, fear of spiders, fear of snakes. I'm going to plop you into a little bit of a different situation, or maybe not such a different situation for some of my listeners. My infographics go all over the place. And I'm going to introduce you to the Middle East, which people always say is so confusing. It is confusing. Not so much when you look at it through a lens of fear. Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan is not really the Middle East, but I'm going to include them because I'm also going to throw China into this mix. These are cultures that just their written records go back close to 5,000 years. That gives us a lot of history to work with. Over 5,000 years, a heck of a lot has come and gone. And the people are fully aware of that. China, they've had good emperors, they've had bad emperors, they've had revolutions, they've had invasions. You name it, you read the Chinese history, you read their mythology, and it is very interesting. And it comes down to fear. Sun Tzu, in his Art of War, basically writes about how to control fear. Know your enemy, know yourself, and you'll win every battle. It's a lot more complicated than that, but it's the most quoted phrase. Because you know what you're capable of, and you know what your opponent is afraid of, you got an advantage. You got a leg up. You're going somewhere. Pakistan and India has the Hindus' Ganges River civilization. There was a big civilization that popped up in that area at about the same time as Mesopotamia and China, and it disappeared. It went away. We have the writing. We have some attempts to translate that writing, but overall, the people still remember. They have tales, they have stories, they have legends of what went before. And no matter how accurate they are or inaccurate they are, the fact is the people remember because they're afraid to forget. They have arranged marriages and tribal alliances, and they don't seem to make sense to a, quote, rational, end quote, Western observer. Because Westerners, again, using the scientific term, are Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Weird. That's the scientific term, and it's used very well in my opinion, especially in this case. I'm going to leave aside the whole multiple bride things because my opinion is irrelevant on that in this particular case. But marrying your son or your daughter off to another tribe is completely pragmatic for them. Once you have your son or daughter in that other tribe, then you have an ally, somebody who will advocate for you, or they're going to think, I can't go to war with my son-in-law, my daughter-in-law, whatever it might be, because we just had a peace ceremony with them. And this is where fear kicks in. This is where the seeming irrationality kicks in, but it's perfectly rational. You have more than one daughter. You have more than one son. You marry them off to multiple people. And now this is where people don't understand how the tribal alliances shift around so easily. Because it makes perfect sense in their minds. You have a quarrel with your brother-in-law's tribe that he married into because you both want the same resource. Let's say it's water. Let's say whatever it is, a particular fruit that you're very fond of. And that tribe wants it too. Whereas your daughter-in-law's tribe has a different quarrel with your son-in-law's tribe, and they have no interest in that fruit. They don't like the flavor, they have enough of it, whatever the case is. In that case, it's rational for you to ally yourself with your daughter-in-law's tribe, and the two of you to work against your son-in-law's tribe. The same token, suddenly that fruit's out of season, no one's getting it, and people are now looking to hunt warm clothed animals, sheep, goats, whatever, and some sheep are stray, they're loose, and you think they belong to your daughter-in-law's tribe, but your son-in-law's tribe also wants new clothes because of the coming season. It's perfectly rational for you at that point to ally with your son-in-law's tribe. And that's why there's fear in those areas. There's paranoia because it's logical. It's rational for them to be worried about what the tribe next door is going to be doing, because you don't know what their whims are at that particular moment. And is your blood tie to them stronger than their desire for whatever limited resource you have? It's a very interesting dynamic. And this is why when we go in and we start saying Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, stuff like that, those are lines on a map drawn by people mostly after World War II. That's why Iran is called Iran. Ancient Persia, the borders do match up with Iran, and indeed many Iranians consider themselves Persian, but the country calls itself Iran because it is not ancient Persia, it's the modern state of Iran. And the modern state of Iran, throwing aside its history, has been through multiple massive government changes. They had the Shah of Iran, and he ruled... I'm not going to judge his rule because it's really before my effective time. I can't say anything. I wasn't there. There's differing opinions. And he was kicked out, and they've had a prime minister installed. The Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic powers decided that was not good enough for them. So after a few years, they kicked the president out and put the Shah back in. Of course, the Shah parades back in, thinking he's got all this support, and he does have the support from the elite. He was still afraid because he'd been kicked out once. So he started to crack down on all those people who had given him resistance. Whether he was good, bad, indifferent, whatever he was before, out of fear he became worse. He persecuted more. He took away more liberties. He went after minorities. And that's why a second, more radicalized movement sprung up, overthrew him, and gave us our modern-day Iran, which itself is justifiably afraid because the United States has invaded Iraq, which is on their eastern border, and Afghanistan, which is on their western border. And even though the United States only has 2,500 troops in Afghanistan at present, they also have contractors, which you might know as mercenaries. Iran, which has internal problems just like any other nation, they're not one big unified group of people. Most of them are like you and I, struggling to make a buck, going day to day. That's just the way things are. So when I speak about a country, I please want everybody to remember I'm talking about its leadership, not its people. Now, I'm not even talking about all of its leadership, but simply the leadership that's represented to us. So the leadership looks at this big international bully with a nuclear arsenal, with multiple types of bombers, multiple types of aircraft, and they got the money to spend on war. Remember, war costs money. If you have a ship, it takes years to build a ship. Aircraft, look at the F-35. It's been over a decade in development and they're still working on it. Soldier. Train a soldier. Any sort of competence for fighting is going to take 4 to 6 weeks at minimum. For me to take an 18-year-old and say, okay, this is drill, this is target practice, you're talking 4 to 6 weeks minimum. Have a well-trained soldier takes 6 months to a year. And those well-trained soldiers are almost always the first to get thrown into a conflict, and they need to replace them with the soldiers that replace them 4 to 6 weeks. Iran has soldiers. It does have good defenses. It's actually got some pretty good friends in China and Pakistan. But that's still not enough. But Silverlight, you say, isn't Pakistan our friend? You're catching on to the fear portion. Pakistan is our friend, but they also are afraid. That's why they were sheltering bin Laden, despite being our ally, because they're afraid what would happen if they didn't. He has tribal alliances. He had money, lots and lots of money. And Pakistan, while it's the 5th largest country in terms of its population, is like 45 or 50th in terms of its economy. So there's not a lot of money to go around. It was pragmatic for Pakistan to simply ignore the fact that he was sitting there. And then when they discovered him, they could say, oops. And that's why it's pragmatic for Pakistan to trade with Iran. Because if they do that, they get the benefits that go to Iran. And since China is trying to invest $600 billion into Iran, Pakistan will at least get a little of that, especially if China goes through with their plan to put a high-speed railroad into Iran. Now, all of a sudden, Pakistan is in a pretty good position. They've got their regional power right sitting in their backyard, China. They have another ally they can trade with next door, Iran. And their traditional enemy, India, is isolated. It's a classic strategy. Pakistan and India are pretty well matched when it comes to military forces, in terms of numbers, in terms of size, in terms of capabilities. That's why having China there is such a big deal. China can overwhelm them. Although during the epidemic, it was they did have that border skirmish, and the reports are coming out now that China got quite the bloody nose out of it. So perhaps India is doing better than we think. India is drifting more and more to the Western powers. They're now flying Russian and French jets. Russia traditionally sides with China, Iran, stuff like that. But India is playing both sides. Why? Because of fear. If China manages to get a unified front with Pakistan and Iran, it leaves India pretty much alone. Yes, the United States is sitting across the ways and ready to bring their aircraft carriers and stuff, but the same token, India is going to have to fight alone against a lot of people. They're not crazy. They know they need other allies. So they need to keep their Russian people happy, but they also need to keep Europe happy. Again, this is all shifting alliances. It seems crazy when you look at it at first. But when you realize fear motivates people, it makes perfect sense. It makes rational sense. Logic is not like Mr. Spock says. He tries to exemplify pure logic. That is not logical, Captain. Emotions are irrelevant, Captain. Emotions are highly relevant. And you must take them into account anytime you examine any decision. Especially when you're dealing with somewhere that has thousands of years of these emotions built up. Let's go back to the individual for a second. It was nice to dip our toe into conspiracy politics for a second, but this show is about the anomalous, the unusual. Fear still motivates each and every person out there. And for an example of how controlling fear can be, I want you to think back when you were young. Perhaps when you were a child, if you can remember that far back. I know that was a long time for some of us and not so long for others of us. But one thing almost everybody shares in common is the experience of something that was really scary. Maybe it was being locked in the basement. Maybe it was taking a roller coaster ride. There was something that happened to you as a child that scared the dickens out of you. And you'd never want to go through that again. I don't want you to relive that particular incident. I don't wish that on anybody, and I don't want to trigger any panic attacks or anxiety, or I don't want to make anybody suffer. But I just want that moment of fear. I want you to think about that for a second. Remember how paralyzing it was? Remember your heart racing? Do you remember your vision blurring? Remember your mind racing at 1,000,000 miles a second? What am I going to do? What am I going to do? Can I do this? Can I do this? Blah, blah, blah. That's a survival mechanism. It's called a fight or flight response. The adrenaline pumps in your body. You start breathing heavily to make sure you've got extra oxygen in your lungs. You are experiencing fear. And it's something as easy as being locked in the basement. Maybe you didn't like the mall Santa Claus. Maybe there was a clown that showed up at a birthday party. It doesn't matter what it was. And I'm not trivializing whatever that experience was because it was real for you. Again, while you can't apply ration to fear, you can apply fear to explain rationality. And it's more logical than you think. And that fear is insidious. It's within, I would say, everybody. There might be a few select cases of saints and Dalai Lamas and monks who have transcended fear. But for most people on the street, they're experiencing fear. That's how movies and entertainment get you. They tickle that sense of fear, and they use it to trigger emotions. That's why in Game of Thrones, in Battlestar Galactica, you tune every week because you're afraid your favorite character, that'll be their last episode. Books do it all this time. Suspense, fear, this gothic horror trend that makes vampires look sexy that simply won't go away. Pet peeve of mine. Sorry. Vampires are not sexy. They're undead who want to kill you and eat you. Drink your blood. This is not a sexy thing. However, I digress. That entire genre is designed to play off your fear and manipulate it into making you think you had a good time. Because once the fear goes away, your brain releases chemicals. And they're natural chemicals, and it's a little bit of a high. Now, admittedly, watching a horror movie doesn't give you a high the same way that drugs do, but the same token, it still gives you a tiny little bit of a high. Not as much as you get from a coffee, but enough for you to think, oh, I want to watch that movie again. It was exciting. It was daring. It made me feel for the characters. It made me want to want them to succeed. And that's how powerful fear is, which is why the media uses fear. How much rational debate have you seen in the past 20 years? And I'm going to put that right back to September 11th, 2001. The second that hit, rationality went out the window. Did you know there used to be a law that required, that's right, required news stations to present a balanced and unbiased opinion. So if they had the Ku Klux Klan on, they would have to have the Black Panthers or somebody like that was equally extreme, so that way it would balance out the viewpoint. The law was repealed in the 1980s, and that's what allows the media to go full fear all the time. Because the media reads the same psychiatrists and psychologists that I do. And the media needs attention. To get your attention, they use fear. Is your drinking water killing you? Tune in at 6 o'clock to find out. Oh my God, what's in my drinking water? Of course you're going to tune in at 6 o'clock or go online and Google it. But that's how they get you. Those wonderful 10-second clips are written by specialists, and they only want your attention. And remember, when fear gets your attention, the fear goes from being subconscious to controlling your consciousness. And you go from being a relatively rational person to being irrationally scared. Now, I don't want anybody to get scared. It's a scary enough world out there with what we're dealing with. And even after what we're dealing with, it's going to keep being scary because the media is not going to let go of that. That is their lifeblood. That's what they depend on. And just like those tribes that we say in the Middle East we can't understand, that's why on Facebook and in life you get these little cliques. You stick together with people who share the same fears as you do. Because you don't like snakes, you're not going to invite the reptile farm in to visit your kids. Fear makes good friends. Not eros, not love. Love develops over time, but fear is really the first thing we bond over. This person's like me, I don't need to be afraid of them, therefore we can be friends. Might not agree 100% with the psychologists, with Freud, with Jung, and Ernest Becker, but the same token, I find their explanation quite compelling. And I encourage anybody to research them more because the world becomes suddenly a lot more explainable. For those of you who've made it to the end, we wish to thank you for listening to the Silverlight Show. Once again, you can reach us at Silverlight Live on Twitter. That's at Silverlight Live. Feel free to drop us an email, which is silverlightservices@gmail.com. This is all lowercase, by the way. silverlightservices@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, support our sponsors. We only accept sponsors whose products that we believe in, and we hope that you will benefit as much as we do. Our books will be listed in the description. Please feel free to help yourself to one. That's the lifeblood of the show. We're not making money from YouTube. We sponsor products that we believe in. This may change in a little bit, but right now, we believe information should be free. The books are a labor of love, and we believe in exchanging something with you for a fair price. But that's it for this week's show. Don't let the fear get to you. Always try to respond with love and understanding and really examine your fear. Thank you for listening and have a great day.